The air was thick with smoke and screams. It tasted of ash and salt, a foul cocktail that clung to the back of Dagny's throat. She moved through the chaos of her burning village, a ghost in leather and steel, her face smudged with soot. This was what she had run from. This kind of fire, this kind of death. She had traded one battlefield for another, and this one had found her in her sleep. Her hand was tight on the hilt of the short sword she kept beneath her cot, a relic of a life she'd tried to bury. The raiders were frenzied, their eyes wild in the flickering firelight. They were pirates, scavengers from the Isles, and they were tearing her small, quiet world apart. She dodged a swinging axe, the wind of it whispering past her ear, and drove her own blade into the soft space beneath the man's arm. He grunted, a sound of surprise more than pain, and fell. She felt nothing. No triumph, no fear. Just a hollow, familiar echo. This was what she was. A killer. Not a mender of nets, not a seller of fish. A weapon. A child's cry cut through the din. It was sharp, terrified. It came from the direction of the old salt-curing house, now a roaring inferno. Dagny didn't think. She ran. The heat was a physical blow, a wall she had to push through. Splinters of burning wood rained down around her. Inside the collapsing structure, she saw it. A small boy, no older than 5, cowering behind a stack of smoldering barrels. And standing over him, a shield of black fur and snarling teeth, was a wolf. It was immense. Larger than any wolf she had ever seen. A creature of midnight and shadow. Its fur was singed, its flank bleeding from a deep gash where a spearhead was still embedded, but it did not move. It held its ground against 2 raiders who were circling it, their faces a mixture of greed and fear. "The beast is the Alpha King's," one of them snarled, his eyes fixed on the silver chain barely visible around the wolf's neck. "Kill it, and the king's strength dies with it." The Alpha King. The name was a legend, a whispered story of a ruler to the north, a man who had not been seen in years, who was said to command the very winter. Dagny had thought it a fairy tale, but the wolf was real. The pain in its golden eyes was real. And the child it was protecting was about to die. She didn't announce herself. She simply became a part of the fight. Her sword was a blur, deflecting a clumsy spear thrust. The raiders turned, startled. They had not seen her. They saw only a woman, dirt-streaked and small. They smiled. It was the last thing they ever did. Dagny moved with a grim efficiency that had been beaten into her since she could hold a blade. She did not fight like a cornered villager. She fought like a trained soldier. In moments, it was over. The 2 men lay still on the burning floor. The great wolf turned its head, its golden eyes locking onto hers. The snarl was gone, replaced by a deep, shuddering whine. It took a step toward her, then stumbled, its massive body swaying. It was losing too much blood. "Easy," she whispered, her voice rough with smoke. She held up her hands, showing they were empty. "I'm not going to hurt you. Or the boy." She approached slowly. The heat was scorching her skin. The wolf watched her, its gaze intelligent, assessing. It seemed to understand. It dipped its head, a gesture of trust that sent a strange tremor through her. "We have to get out of here," she said, more to herself than to the animal. She scooped the crying child into her arms. He was light, a bundle of trembling limbs. "It's all right, little one, you're safe." The wolf let out a low growl, not of aggression, but of agreement. It turned and nudged her with its head toward a collapsed section of the back wall. An escape. As she scrambled over the burning timbers, the wolf stayed beside her, a dark guardian. Once they were clear of the building, it sagged, its breath coming in ragged pants. The spearhead in its side was lodged deep. "You can't go on like this," she said, laying the child down in a sheltered spot behind some rocks. She tore a strip from her tunic. "Let me see." She expected it to snap, to defend its wound, but it stood unnervingly still as she worked her fingers around the spearhead. The metal was hot. The flesh around it was mangled. It would take a hard pull. "This is going to hurt," she warned. The wolf just looked at her. Its eyes were a deep, liquid gold, and in their depths, she saw an agony that went beyond the physical wound. It was a pain of the soul, a pain she recognized. She gripped the shaft and pulled. The wolf screamed, a sound that was half howl, half human cry of anguish. It tore through the night, silencing the sounds of the raid for a heartbeat. But it did not move. It did not bite. It trusted her. The spearhead came free with a sickening tear of flesh. Blood, dark and hot, gushed from the wound. She pressed the cloth against it, applying pressure, her hands trembling slightly. "Hold still," she murmured. "Just hold still." The wolf's legs buckled. It fell to the ground with a heavy thud. But as it fell, it did something that stunned her. It reached out with its massive head and gently herded her and the boy away from the burning village, pushing them toward the dark line of the cliffs and the sea beyond. Even in its agony, it was protecting them. It was taking them somewhere. Then its head dropped, its eyes closed, and the great wolf lay still. Dagny stared at the enormous wounded animal. The Alpha King's wolf. She should run, take the boy, and disappear into the night. Getting involved with legends and kings was a death sentence. But she looked at the silver chain around its neck, at the blood matting its dark fur, at the way it had shielded a child it didn't know. She couldn't leave it. Her past had taught her how to kill, but her heart, the part of her she thought had died long ago, was telling her to heal. She found the hidden cove she had used for solitude, a sliver of sand and stone accessible only at low tide. Getting the wolf there had been a nightmare. It was a dead weight, impossibly heavy. She had half dragged, half coaxed its unconscious body across the wet sand, the little boy, Finn, clinging to her back. Now it lay on the dry part of the cave floor. She had cleaned the wound as best she could with salt water and packed it with the moss she knew drew out infection. She had built a small, smokeless fire from driftwood. Finn was asleep, curled in her spare cloak. She watched the wolf's chest rise and fall. It was shallow, too shallow. The creature was dying. She had done all she could. As the tide began to turn, sealing them inside the cave, a strange shimmer filled the air around the wolf. The shadows seemed to twist, to warp. She watched, her hand on her sword, as the lines of the great beast blurred. Fur receded. Bones cracked and shifted, reforming with a series of sickening snaps. Where the wolf had been, a man now lay. He was as large as the wolf had been, broad-shouldered and long of limb, his body a tapestry of old scars. A silver chain was still clasped around his neck. His hair was black as a raven's wing, matted with sweat and blood. His face was harsh, all sharp angles and unforgiving lines, but it was contorted in pain. The gash in his side was still there, angry and red against his pale skin. This was the Alpha King. He was nothing like the stories. He wasn't a remote god of winter. He was a broken man, bleeding out on the floor of her cave. A fever had taken hold of him. He thrashed in his sleep, muttering words she couldn't understand, names that sounded like curses. His skin was burning hot to the touch, then suddenly, terrifyingly cold. She spent the next 2 days fighting it, forcing bitter teas between his cracked lips, bathing his forehead with cool water. He never fully woke, but sometimes his eyes would open, unfocused and clouded with delirium. They were the same gold as the wolf's. "My fault," he would rasp, his voice a low thunder. "All of them. My fault." She didn't know what he was talking about. She only knew the guilt in his voice was a raw, living thing. It was the same guilt she carried in her own chest, a cold stone that never went away. On the third day, the fever broke. He woke, and his eyes were clear. He looked at her, then at the sleeping child, then at the stitched wound in his side. She had used fishing line and a sharpened bone. The work was crude, but it held. "You," he said. His voice was weak, but it still held an undeniable authority. "I'm Dagny," she said, keeping her tone even. She offered him a water skin. "You've been unconscious for 3 days." He drank, his eyes never leaving her face. He was reading her, she realized, in a way that was unnervingly perceptive. He saw the calluses on her hands, the tension in her shoulders, the way she positioned herself between him and the cave entrance. "You're a warrior," he stated. It wasn't a question. "I was," she said, the lie tasting like ash. "A long time ago." "Warriors don't stop being warriors, Dagny," he said softly. "They just find different wars." He looked at the boy. "Finn. His name is Finn. I felt his terror when the village was attacked. I couldn't let it happen again." Again. There was that word again. The guilt flared in his eyes. "Why did you help me?" he asked, his voice raw. "My enemies were there. You could have let them finish the job." "You were protecting a child," she said simply. "That's all that mattered." He was silent for a long time, just watching her. She felt stripped bare under that gaze, as if he could see every scar on her soul. She busied herself with the fire, uncomfortable with the intensity. "My name is Soren," he said finally. He didn't say he was the king. He didn't have to. The power rolling off him, even in his weakened state, was unmistakable. He was the center of his own gravity. The days that followed fell into a strange rhythm. They were trapped in the cove by the tides and by his weakness. She would hunt for shellfish and crabs in the rock pools when the water receded. He would watch, slowly regaining his strength. He would talk to Finn, his deep voice gentle and calming, telling the boy old stories of star wolves and mountain spirits. He never asked about her past, and she never offered. It was an unspoken truce. They were just 2 survivors and a child in a cave by the sea. But the peace was fragile. At night, his nightmares returned. He would cry out, his body rigid, his hands clenched into fists. He was always fighting a battle he couldn't win, reliving a failure that was eating him alive. One night the screams were worse than ever. She went to him, intending to wake him, but he was burning with a fever again. His wound had become infected. "Soren," she said, shaking his shoulder. "Wake up." His eyes flew open, but they were wild, seeing a past she couldn't. He grabbed her wrist, his grip like iron. "Lyra, no," he roared, his face a mask of anguish. "Don't do it." The name hit her like a physical blow. Lyra, the captain of her old company. The woman whose ambition had driven Dagny into hiding. The woman who had framed her for cowardice. "Soren, it's me. It's Dagny," she said, her voice shaking. His eyes cleared for a moment. He looked at her, his expression crumbling from rage into a devastating sorrow. He was still holding her wrist, but his grip gentled. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." And then he said the words that shattered her carefully constructed walls. "I need you." It wasn't a confession of love. It was something deeper, more desperate. It was the admission of a drowning man reaching for a hand in the dark. He wasn't speaking to the ghost of his past. He was speaking to her. Her heart, the foolish, stubborn thing, ached in her chest. She had spent years convincing herself she needed no one, that she was an island. But in that moment, looking at the broken king, she knew she was lost. She stayed by his side, fighting the infection. She used every bit of knowledge she had, every herb, every poultice. She didn't sleep. She just watched him, her hand resting on his forehead, trying to will her own strength into him. The world outside the cave ceased to exist. There was only the sound of the waves, the crackle of the fire, and the man breathing beside her. His people were looking for him. She could feel it. A tension in the air, the distant sound of horns on the wind. She saw riders on the cliffs above, their banners snapping. They were a threat. If they found him like this, weak and vulnerable, his enemies might use it. If they found her with him, they would kill her as a kidnapper or an assassin. The siege was closing in. "They're coming," she told him one morning. He was stronger, able to sit up, but still far from healed. "My guard," he confirmed, his jaw tight. "They will be thorough." "Thorough means they will find us," she said, "and they won't ask questions." "You should go," he said, his golden eyes filled with a pain that had nothing to do with his wound. "Take the boy, disappear. I've brought you nothing but danger." "And where would you have me go?" she asked, a bitter laugh escaping her. "There is nowhere for me to run where my past won't find me, or yours." "Dagny." "No," she said, her voice firm. "I'm not leaving you." The words hung in the air between them. It was a promise, a vow. He stared at her, and for the first time, she saw something other than guilt or pain in his eyes. It was awe. The decision was made, but it was too late. They came at low tide. Not his guard, not his people. Raiders, the same ones who had burned the village. And leading them, her armor gleaming in the sun, was a woman with hair the color of spun gold and eyes as cold as the sea in winter. Lyra. "Well, well," Lyra said, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. She stepped into the cave, her sword drawn. "Look what the tide washed in. The little deserter Dagny." Dagny's blood ran cold. She pushed Finn behind her, her own sword in her hand. "Lyra." Lyra's eyes flicked to Soren, who was struggling to his feet, his hand pressed to his wounded side. A slow, cruel smile spread across her face. "And the lost king," she purred. My, what a prize." She turned her gaze back to Dagny. "I always knew you were a traitor, running from the field of battle. And now, consorting with the enemy's king." "He is not my enemy," Soren growled, his voice resonating with power despite his weakness. "Oh, but you are mine," Lyra said, her smile widening. "With you gone, the northern throne is in chaos. Your council is tearing itself apart. My allies have made their move. The kingdom is weak. And I am here to claim the spoils." Soren's identity slammed into Dagny with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't just a title. He was the king of the very people Lyra served. The people Dagny had run from. Lyra hadn't been consorting with the raiders. She had hired them. This was a coup. "You won't succeed," Soren said, taking a step forward. He swayed, and Dagny instinctively reached out to steady him. Lyra laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "Look at you, the great Alpha King, being held up by a runaway coward. You're pathetic." She gestured to her men. "Take them. The boy, too. He's a witness." Dagny saw the trap closing. They were outnumbered, and Soren was in no shape to fight. She had to make a choice. "Wait," she said, her voice clear and cold. "You want me, Lyra. This has always been about me. Let them go." Lyra tilted her head, considering. "A tempting offer, but no. I think I'll take all of you. The king will be excellent leverage, and you will be my proof. The deserter who helped me uncover his treason." Treason. The lie was audacious, breathtaking. Lyra was going to paint Soren as a traitor who had abandoned his kingdom and allied with its enemies, with Dagny as the star witness. The raiders surged forward. Dagny fought, a whirlwind of desperation and skill. but it was hopeless. She was driven back, her sword knocked from her hand. They seized Soren, who roared in fury and pain as they slammed him against the cave wall. Others grabbed Finn, who was screaming in terror. They dragged Dagny out of the cave and onto the beach. Lyra stood over her, her face triumphant. "It's over, Dagny," she said. "I've won. I will be hailed as a hero, the savior of the kingdom, and you will be forgotten." She was right. This was it. The lowest point. Lyra had won. She had the king, she had the child, and she had the perfect story to seize power. Dagny was helpless, a prisoner, her name already being dragged through the mud. They were taken to the garrison at Highcliffe, the coastal fortress that Lyra now commanded. Soren was thrown into a deep, lightless cell. Dagny was locked in a tower room. Finn was taken somewhere else entirely, his cries echoing in the stone halls. The separation was a physical agony. It was as if a cord connecting her to Soren had been stretched taut to the point of breaking. She could feel his rage, his pain, his despair, as if it were her own. Days turned into a week. Lyra was cementing her power, sending out riders with her version of the truth. The king had been found, a traitor allied with pirates, captured by the heroic Captain Lyra. The kingdom was in turmoil. Dagny paced her cell like a caged animal. She was a coward, a deserter. That's what they called her. That's what she had called herself for years. She had run from Lyra's war, from the politics and the bloodshed. But running hadn't saved anyone. It had only led her here, to this cage, while the people she cared about suffered. She had to do something. Not as a warrior, not as a deserter, but as Dagny, the woman who had pulled a spear from a wolf's side, the woman a dying king had said he needed. Her chance came in the form of a young guard, a boy she recognized from the village. His family had been lost in the fire. He brought her food, his eyes full of confusion and pity. "They say you betrayed us," he whispered one night. "Lyra is the traitor," Dagny said, her voice low and intense. "She hired the raiders. She burned our home. Soren, the king, was trying to protect us." She saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes. The seed was planted. A few nights later, the key to her cell was left in a loaf of bread. She moved through the fortress like a shadow. She was not going to run. She was not going to try to free Soren. Not yet. He was too well guarded, and she was just one woman. No. She was going to end this. She was going to confront the source of the poison. She found Lyra in the great hall, feasting with the raider captains. She was drunk on wine and power, laughing as she described her plans for the kingdom. Dagny walked into the center of the room. The hall fell silent. Every eye turned to her. Lyra's face went from shock to fury. "Seize her!" Lyra screamed, but Dagny didn't draw a weapon. She just stood there, her hands open at her sides. "You wanted me, Lyra," she said, her voice ringing with a strange power. "Here I am, but you are a liar and a murderer. You burned my village. You killed my friends." "You are a deserter," Lyra spat, rising from her chair. "You have no honor." "My honor is not for you to judge," Dagny said, "but your crimes are for all to see." Lyra's face was purple with rage. She wanted to kill Dagny, but not like this. She needed to discredit her first. "You have no proof," she sneered. "I have the truth," Dagny replied. "And that is more powerful than your army." Lyra lost control. This was not how it was supposed to go. Dagny was supposed to be broken, begging, not standing before her, radiating a strength she had never seen before. "Enough of this," Lyra shrieked. She grabbed a crossbow from a nearby guard. "To prove my loyalty to the kingdom, and to show you all the fate of traitors, I will execute the symbol of our enemy's weakness." Guards dragged a terrified Finn into the hall. He was crying, his small face streaked with tears. "No," Dagny whispered, her blood turning to ice. "Watch, deserter. Lyra hissed, leveling the crossbow at the child. Watch what happens to those who stand in my way. Something inside Dagny broke. It was not a thought. It was not a decision. It was a primal, unstoppable wave of pure, protective rage. The world didn't just turn against her friends. It turned against children. It allowed monsters like Lyra to point weapons at innocents, and she would not allow it. She refused. A heat bloomed in her chest, a furnace igniting where her heart used to be. It was not the heat of anger. It was the heat of creation, the fire at the center of a star. It surged through her veins, a torrent of liquid sunlight. She raised her hand. "Stop," she said. The word was not a plea. It was a command. And the very air obeyed. A wave of invisible force, of pure, shimmering heat, erupted from her. It was not a fire that burned. It was a fire that judged. It swept through the hall, and every weapon, every sword, every dagger, every crossbow bolt, glowed cherry red and then melted, dripping like hot wax onto the stone floor. The men cried out, dropping their ruined weapons, staring at their empty, unharmed hands. The heat had touched only the steel, leaving flesh and wood and stone untouched. Lyra stared at the molten lump that had been her crossbow, her face a mask of disbelief and terror. What are you?" she stammered. Dagny didn't answer. She walked forward, the air around her vibrating with power. She knelt and gathered Finn into her arms, holding him close. He stopped crying, his eyes wide with wonder. And then, she heard it. The sound of a cell door splintering, a roar of pure alpha fury that shook the very foundations of the fortress. Soren burst into the hall. He was no longer a broken man. He was the Alpha King. His golden eyes were blazing, and behind him were the fortress guards, the young man who had freed her among them, their faces set with grim resolve. They had chosen their side. He stopped short when he saw her. He saw the melted weapons. He saw the power humming around her, a visible aura of gold and white light. He saw her holding the child. He didn't look afraid. He didn't look shocked. He looked like he was seeing something he had known was there all along. "Dagny," he breathed, his voice filled with reverence. He walked to her, ignoring Lyra and her stunned mercenaries. He knelt before her, before the woman who had saved him, and gently touched her face. His touch was warm, grounding. The light around her softened, sinking back beneath her skin, but it didn't disappear. It was a part of her now. "I knew," he whispered. "The moment my wolf saw you in the fire, he knew. You are not a deserter. You are a queen." Tears streamed down her face, tears of relief, of release, of a lifetime of pain washing away. She was not worthless. She was not a coward. She was power. She was hope. "I love you, Dagny," he said, his voice quiet but absolute, a vow spoken in the heart of the storm she had created. "I think I have since you pulled the darkness from my soul in that cave." "I love you, Soren," she replied, her voice steady and sure. The words felt like coming home. He rose, pulling her to her feet, Finn still held safely in her arms. Together they turned to face Lyra. Lyra's face was a ruin of hate and fear. "She's a witch, a monster." "She is my mate," Soren declared, his voice booming through the hall. "And the future Queen of the North. Your treason is at an end, Lyra." The guards moved as one, surrounding Lyra and her men. There was no fight. Their weapons were gone, and their will was broken. The power Dagny had unleashed had been a final, undeniable judgment. It was over. The siege was broken. The villain was defeated. Soren held her, his arms a circle of safety and strength. She leaned against him, finally allowing herself to feel the exhaustion, the bone-deep weariness of the fight. But it was a good exhaustion, an earned peace. "You saved me," he murmured into her hair. "No," she whispered back, her voice muffled against his chest. We saved each other. 6 months later, Dagny stood on the balcony of the northern citadel, looking out over a land blanketed in pristine snow. The air was cold and clean, and it no longer tasted of ash. A small hand slipped into hers. Look, Finn said, pointing to the sky. The star wolves are running tonight. She smiled, squeezing his hand. Finn was their son now, in all the ways that mattered. He was a constant, joyful reminder of the fire that had forged their family. Strong arms wrapped around her from behind, and Soren's warmth enveloped her. He rested his chin on her shoulder, his presence a solid, comforting weight. The council is still arguing about the trade routes with the coastal territories, he said, his voice a low rumble against her ear. Let them argue, she replied, leaning back into him. They'll figure it out. The kingdom had been in turmoil when they returned, but Soren's presence, combined with the story of Dagny's power, a power of cleansing fire, not destructive, had slowly healed the rifts. Lyra had been exiled, stripped of her rank and titles, a fate worse than death for a woman so hungry for power. The guilt that had haunted Soren for so long had finally receded. He'd confessed it to her one night, under the shimmering northern lights. A disastrous battle years ago, a choice he'd made that had cost hundreds of his people their lives, including his first pack. His guilt had weakened him, had nearly killed his wolf. He believed the fire that had taken her village was a punishment, a repeat of his failure. But meeting her, protecting Finn, had shown him a different path. Not redemption through victory, but through a single, meaningful act of protection. He had saved one child, and in doing so, had begun to save himself. Are you happy, my queen? He asked softly. She turned in his arms, her hands coming up to cup his face. The harsh lines were still there, but they were softened now by love, by peace. His golden eyes were clear and bright. I am, she said, and it was the truest thing she had ever spoken. She was no longer a warrior in hiding or a deserter running from her past. She was Dagny, Queen of the North, wielder of the sun's own heart. She had a home, a family, a love that had been born in the heart of a fire. She had been found by a wolf in a burning village, and in saving him, she had finally, truly saved herself. He kissed her then, a slow, deep kiss filled with the promise of long, peaceful winters and the warmth of a fire that would never go out.